When it rains, it pours. And for Stellantis, it is a torrential downpour. In today's video, we're talking 8 issues that are plaguing Stellantis and whether they're going to be able to resolve them. Now, Stellantis seems to be in the news a lot recently. I like to talk about other brands, but unfortunately, every time I open up my phone, there's some new article or new topic about Stellantis and some of the issues that they're facing. And in today's video, I wanted to boil it down to the 8 main topics and then discuss whether they're going to be able to make their way through this storm. So without further ado, let's start off in no particular order with the first issue that Stellantis is facing. First is a recent article about the Indiana Police Department suing Stellantis, or Dodge specifically, because of faulty engines. More specifically, their oil cooler had failures in as low as like 18 or 20,000 miles on a vehicle, and their Dodge Durango police cruisers have essentially just gone bust. I mean, the engines have stopped working, there's lots of failures, and it's led to the point of the police department essentially selling off these vehicles at a loss and having to buy a new set of police fleet vehicles from Ford. And, they expect their money back because the taxpayers are paying for this, and it's becoming kind of an issue going on with the Dodge Durango police cruiser. Now, this is just one example of the poor quality that's impacting Stellantis brands. In the last couple of videos, I've talked about the issues hitting Jeep. They had a factory recall for a faulty instrument gauge cluster display. I recently saw in the news that they have an issue where the backup camera might go inactive or the wiring harness might short circuit, and so you can't actually see anything in the backup camera, which is obviously a federal mandate. There's reports of some Jeeps igniting on fire by just standing still for like 2 weeks. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. Poor quality is not new to Stellantis brands. It's never been the Toyota of American brands, but it seems like these poor quality issues are starting to resurface themselves and starting to kind of tie the brand as just a maker of poor quality vehicles. And this is just an example of that. So much so that I heard reports that they're not going to be releasing the Jeep Wagoneer S, which is their first kind of crossover electric vehicle, until the build quality is perfect. Now, perfect to Stellantis may mean something different to Toyota, so we'll have to wait and see whether the Wagoneer S, their first electric crossover, is really going to be reliable and have good build quality. I'm a little skeptical of that, but I guess time will tell. Now, the second issue plaguing Stellantis is discontent amongst not only its buyer base, but its dealer base as well. There was a report earlier in the summer that a bunch of dealers got together and sent a letter to the CEO complaining about the issues they were facing, and it honestly led to the CEO coming here, I think in July or August, to visit the factories and kind of figure out what's going on. And then they say that that letter, or at least the visit, helped assist in creating new incentives and trying to improve inventory levels in August, and so yada yada yada. But most recently, there was a letter sent in September, again from the dealer association to Stellantis, complaining about all of the issues that us consumers are talking about, right? Poor inventory, not enough of the right cars, everything is overpriced, and the list goes on. And Stellantis kind of responded saying, we're working on it, things are already getting better, but there's discontent. And I don't need to explain to you how disappointed buyers are, specifically of the Dodge brand, about this next generation Dodge Charger EV. I mean, you can just take one look at the comments section and you'll see how disappointed people are. Now, just because the comment section of certain videos are bad doesn't mean that the product is bad. It doesn't mean people aren't going to buy it, because people sometimes say things, but then they act differently in person. But at the same time, there is definitely some sort of disconnect between the historical brand of Dodge and the one going forward. And a lot of people blame the CEO for making this big change, because even under FCA, when it was Fiat Chrysler, people had the Hellcat, right? They had these Scat Packs. And so I think people are assuming that it's all because of the CEO. And I think there's other factors here at play, but there's just general discontent, and people just maybe aren't as committed to the Jeep, Ram, Dodge brand as they once were even 10, 15 years ago. Now, speaking of the CEO, Carlos Tavares, if I'm pronouncing his name right, he's not new to the industry. I mean, he was head of Peugeot, and he was said to have kind of resurrected the Opel brand when they bought it from GM. So he has a long track record of being able to make brands successful. However, a lot of people are saying that he's not successful when it comes to the Stellantis merger that happened in 2021. And the latest news is that Stellantis is searching for a new chief executive. Now, a lot of people jump to the conclusion that it's only because Stellantis is not doing well. I think that may be part of it, but I also think it's because of his age. He's, I think, 66, or he will be 66 here shortly, and his contract with Stellantis expires in the beginning of 2026. And so I think it makes sense to have some sort of succession plan. A lot of companies have succession plans even before a CEO has even thought about retiring. And so I think that may be part of it, along with maybe disappointment in how the CEO is doing and its stock price is doing. But that's kind of another big thing that, having a change in a chief executive does impact how the brand will function going forward. And so it's unknown if a new CEO comes in that's maybe, less EV oriented, maybe that could change the direction of Dodge, and that could set them back a couple years because they've invested a lot of money into transitioning into this hybrid and EV future. So time will tell, but that is something that's going to happen in the next year and a half that's definitely going to impact the brand. There's also a chance that maybe Stellantis will get rid of the CEO earlier. That's not unheard of either. I'm not sure how it works with the contract and whether that's going to lead to certain costs to the company, but in either case, they may make that decision at the end of 2024 if sales have stagnated and inventory continues to pile up. And it's not just the CEO that's facing issues. There was a report recently about one of the executive directors, and I think he's the head of Ferrari. He's part of a potential alleged $84 million tax fraud lawsuit that's going on in Italy right now. So you throw some legal issues into the mix, that definitely complicates the picture as well. And there's also been a lot of departures. I mean, just recently we had the former CEO of Dodge, Tim Kuniskis. He was retired or departed, or whoever knows what the story is there. I recently reported how the head of Jeep has been replaced with somebody else. And so when you see a lot of turnover, there's a lot of uncertainty because as soon as a new manager comes in, they're going to want to do things a little bit differently. And that could lead to delays when, in my opinion, Stellantis doesn't have the luxury of delays because I think they're already behind the competition. Now, I touched on stock price earlier in the CEO point, but I do want to talk about what's been going on because their stock price is at the lowest level it's been in the last 52 weeks. Now, it's still above where it was when the merger happened in 2021, but that's not saying much because a lot of good things happened since 2021 for the auto industry. Not for us consumers, but for the car business, they made some record profits. And to say it's higher than that level is really not saying much. The fact is, it's at a 52-week low. It's about $15 or something per share. And that is in contrast to earlier this year, back in March of 2024, where it was trading near $30 per share. So it's almost halved in less than 6 months. Also, I want to point out the profits that they showed in the July report that they released for year-to-date, January to June. Their net operating profit was almost 50% of what it was in 2023 for that same period. So unless things improve for the second half of the year, which Stellantis says it's starting to show some signs of improvement, not sure if I believe it, then you're going to continue to show a 50% decline year over year in profit. And that's a pretty big impact to a lot of shareholders out there, and that's obviously being shown off in the stock price. Now, the fifth thing plaguing Stellantis, or I should say Stellantis employees, is layoffs. They've announced layoffs over the last 6 months or so. Earlier in the summer, they talked about buyouts for white-collar workers. And then most recently, they're announcing that as of October 1st, employees at their Sterling Heights facility, which is the facility that builds the Ram 1500, some of those temporary workers that were hired on during the summer are going to be laid off. And that is on top of potential layoffs at the Toledo factory, which is the factory that builds the Jeep Wrangler and Gladiator, which I previously talked about is a vehicle that's sitting on dealership lots. So it would make sense to cut down production there. But nobody likes layoffs, and it's unfortunate that people have to lose their jobs because maybe a manufacturer overhired for whatever reason, and now, the decision they made was not correct, or maybe the market has changed. And that is honestly Stellantis' answer to everything, is the market dynamics have changed, but I don't see as many other manufacturers like Ford or GM doing layoffs. They are doing some, but not to the same extent as Stellantis. And that is on top of the layoffs that are going to be happening officially at the Warren plant, which is the facility that would build the Ram 1500 Classic. I've talked in the past how they're canceling the Ram 1500 Classic, which is like a 15 or 16-year-old car at this point, and they're obviously closing down that facility. They're not going to be needing that anymore. So those individuals are losing their jobs. So Stellantis is just shedding their workforce, trying to become a little bit more profitable, a little bit more lean, but it comes at the sacrifice of people, unfortunately, losing their jobs. And that brings me to the sixth issue plaguing Stellantis, and that is potential strikes from the UAW. Now, it seems like it was just yesterday that UAW was striking against the big three automakers. They settled on a new agreement, a new contract, and here we are about 1 year later, and Stellantis is getting some pressure from UAW about potential strikes. And now it's kind of related to the layoffs that they're announcing, but it's more specifically regarding the Belvidere plant. Now, Stellantis had big, grand ambitions for this plant. They wanted to make it kind of like this multi-billion-dollar EV battery factory and then like a Mopar hub. And they've recently walked away from those plans because obviously things are expensive. And so the UAW is arguing that you can't step away from that. That was part of the contract. And Stellantis is saying, no, it's market conditions. And so they're doing, a pretty big battle against each other. And there's still a chance for a UAW strike to happen. The UAW is also pushing back against Stellantis in regards to the Dodge Durango because Stellantis hasn't really announced the next generation Durango, or if they have, there's a potential replacement for it. I believe it's the Dodge Stealth. But they may move that factory over to Canada and not keep it here in the United States because they want to cut costs. And lastly, Stellantis was going to build a mid-size pickup truck here in the United States, and they've recently shelved plans for that, which I think is a big mistake because the competition from GM, Toyota, and Ford I think are doing really well with mid-size pickup trucks. And I think Ram missed the boat entirely by not reintroducing a Dakota even just a couple years ago, which I believe they could have pretty easily done maybe using the Wrangler chassis. But that is a topic for a different video. Now, as silly as it sounds, a strike may actually be helpful for Stellantis because then they're not producing any new vehicles and they can actually sell through their old dated inventory. And that brings me to the 7th issue plaguing Stellantis, which is something I talked about in a very recent video, and that is that their dealers are sitting on extremely dated inventory. Stellantis is always either at or near the top of the list on the number of days of supply of vehicles sitting on dealer lots. And there's a variety of reasons for this that I've discussed. One, of course, is pricing. I think competition is a good part of it. And I also think their model offering, the lineup that they have, is just not very competitive. I mean, the Dodge Charger EV should have been out about a year ago. They ended production of the Challenger sitting behind me back in December of 2023. Why is it taking about a year for the EV to come out? I know they had to retool a plant, but there's other plants they could have probably used to be able to put this vehicle on the lots sooner. Same with the Ram Charger, the plug-in hybrid Ram 1500 that's supposed to get over like 500 miles of range between the gas and the electric batteries. That's nowhere to be seen. I don't even know if that one's coming out anytime soon in 2024 or 2025. The Ram Revolution, which is their electric Ram pickup truck, pretty much everybody else has arrived to the game. They still haven't. They're kind of late to it. Considering Stellantis has been so heavily investing in EVs, they're really kind of late to the game. Most of the other competition from Ford and GM have already been here for a couple years at this point. And because of their bloated inventory and lack of sales, Cox Automotive projects that as of January to September of 2024, Stellantis is going to show a 17.3% decline in sales versus prior year. So Stellantis continues to struggle to sell these vehicles. And that brings me to the 8th issue plaguing Stellantis, and that is their full focus and attention on developing EVs. Now, I am an EV owner. I like EVs. I think they're great. But to just put all your eggs into one basket is, I think, a pretty big issue. I think they focus too much on EVs, and because of that, their buyer base, being individuals who don't really care much about EVs, are having a hard time justifying the purchase prices and even the method of propulsion of the new vehicles hitting the market. Stellantis is saying the Jeep Wagoneer S is going to be a great seller. I just don't believe it. I think, for one, it's going to be a very expensive car, which is, again, one of the issues they're currently facing, and two, it's an electric vehicle. I don't think very many people are going to be lining up at the dealership to take delivery of one of those when there's a Grand Cherokee 4xE or a Grand Cherokee internal combustion version that's selling for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 less. And again, even though they're focusing on EVs, they're kind of late to the game. As I mentioned earlier, some of these EV products that they've been touting have yet to hit dealership lots. Now, evidence of Stellantis placing all their eggs in one basket when it comes to EVs is their recent headline of them pushing back against the European Union for considering to loosen some of the regulations on emissions that the European Union had enforced on automakers. The EU is seeing that not everybody is going to be compliant. EV sales have started to decline in Europe, and so I think the EU is considering loosening some of these regulations, and Stellantis is like, whoa, 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 hold up. I've invested so much money into this, we can't push back these incentives because they're going to adversely impact the company. They've put all their money into developing these more fuel-efficient powertrains, and now the EU is going to say, wait a minute, you're actually okay, you have another 5 years, that's going to be a problem for Stellantis. So it's a competitive advantage for them if the EU continues to put these stringent emission restrictions and the US follows, because according to Stellantis, they have the platforms available for this more fuel efficient future. Again, it's kind of hard to see based on what you're seeing on dealership lots. Now, again, I'm not against EVs. I love them. I love both internal combustion and EVs. I think both have a time and a place, but I think it's tough when you're just focusing on one. And I think Dodge is doing it right by having the Charger have both an internal combustion and an EV. The downside is the internal combustion is not a V8, which is what muscle car enthusiasts want, but I have a feeling the internal combustion inline-six Hurricane engine is probably going to be their best seller between the EV and the non-EV version. And if they're able to integrate that type of platform going forward, which it seems like they can, I think they'll do well by maybe throwing in a hybrid into some of their vehicles, making one electric, making one purely gasoline. I think BMW has done a good job with that, and I think Stellantis would do well if they offered the variety of different propulsion methods like they are on the Charger EV. So there you have it. That is a lot of issues that the company is having to deal with, from lawsuits, from a variety of different people and governments, to inventory problems, to pushing back on European regulations. The list goes on. Now, it appears that Stellantis is starting to address these problems. In the past, earlier this year, they kind of denied these being issues, but now the numbers speak for themselves, and I think they're starting to realize this. And so some of the things that they're announcing is, for example, the CFO announced that they're going to be cutting 100,000 vehicles from dealership inventory by 2025. I mean, that's about 3 months away. So they're wanting to stop production or pause production on certain vehicles and just kind of run through the remaining inventory, which is unfortunately part of the reason why you're seeing some of these layoffs and these stoppages at factories, which is obviously directly impacting UAW workers, is because they're trying to eat through the inventory that they currently have that's bloated on dealership lots. The next thing they announced is additional dealer incentives. So they said in August they had more of an incentive program that helped impact or boost sales. They're planning on continuing that through the end of the year. And so I imagine if you're looking for any type of Stellantis product through December 31st, 2024, you're probably going to get a pretty good deal because Stellantis is throwing cash at the dealers to try to move this inventory off the lot. Whereas in the past, they wanted to keep the brand name kind of a more premium brand where they're charging more money. The fact is their reliability isn't there and their lineup isn't there to justify these high prices. So they're going to start incentivizing these a lot more. And Stellantis has allocated more of their budget towards incentives than they have in the past. Like I said in my last video, if you're looking for an Alfa Romeo Giulia, I've heard reports of those going upwards of $15,000, $16,000 off MSRP. So if you want a sporty, cool-looking sedan, the Giulia is an awesome option. And if you walk in with a Pulse, chances are you're probably going to be able to get a good deal on a Giulia. In fact, for the 2025 model year, Alfa Romeo has kind of redone their entire packages and lineup. Essentially, you just have the Stelvio, the Giulia, the Tonale, but all of the additional packages aren't trim levels like the Stelvio Competizione, like I reviewed earlier this year. Essentially, it's just going to be, these are the different packages. If you want the more advanced driver assistance features, you pay for this package. If you want the heated and ventilated seats, that's going to be another package. So rather than offering specific trims with all those packages included, you're going to be able to customize a little bit more. And I think Alfa Romeo's justification is you're going to be able to essentially build a vehicle to the price point you want instead of going to the dealership and finding, fully equipped Alfa Romeos going for $60,000, $70,000. So hopefully that helps with their sales as well, but it is kind of an interesting move on Alfa Romeo's part. And another interesting move that, honestly, when I saw this announcement, I thought it was a parody or a joke, is that Chrysler's bringing back the Voyager, which was one of their minivans that they kind of kept through 2022, was a more affordable version, whereas the Pacifica was the more expensive version. They got rid of that in 2023 and just had the more expensive Pacifica. Well, as of 2025, they're bringing back the Voyager. It starts around $42,000 and it's meant to be the affordable minivan. Now, I think it's kind of silly badge engineering here. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a more affordable Pacifica. Just call it a Pacifica and make it a cheaper trim, but whatever. Now Chrysler has two different models, being the Voyager and the Pacifica. They doubled their model selection overnight, but that is just another move by Stellantis to recognize that their pricing is just too aggressive. It's too high. And so this is an example of them bringing in a more affordable option that they previously got rid of because they wanted to make more money. And probably people weren't buying it. They were selecting the Pacifica because they had extra cash, but now people's wallets are a little bit tight tighter, and so they need to look at more affordable options. And I'm all for having more affordable cars, and the Pacifica is an example of that. And clearly the Voyager was a very easy one for them to do because they already have the Pacifica. They just have to remove a couple features and make it more affordable. So I'm curious to see what other vehicles are going to be impacted in a similar way. Are they just going to remove heated seats from one car or a smaller infotainment screen, and then they'll release a cheaper version of the Ram 1500 or the Grand Cherokee? So time will tell what other models are going to be impacted by these lower priced models. Well, there you have it, folks. That finishes off today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. And let me know your thoughts on Stellantis down below. Do you think they'll be able to make it out of this rut? Also, check me out on all the social media at Schwazy_. And until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.